Hi, welcome to The Broken Record on YouTube. I'm Robert Brooke, and today we're going to be talking about Thelonious Monk's Brilliant Corners. I did a shootout for this record, and I'm going to talk about why I did the shootout and some of the things I learned doing it. So stay with me, and we'll be right back. So I sell on Discogs, like I'm sure a lot of you do, and a few weeks ago, maybe a month or so ago, I got an order from a name that I recognized, and it happens to be one of the gentlemen that works at Better Records. And I saw that they were buying a copy of Brilliant Corners that I had for sale. And so I let them know who I was, and I asked if when I shipped them the copy they wanted, if I could send them another copy that I had and enter that copy into the shootout. So they agreed to do that, and I sent the records off. Now, meanwhile, the reason I was selling that copy was because I had convinced myself that the other copy that I had, which had different stampers actually, that I could convince myself that that other copy was the better sounding copy. And so I sent them in, and the shootout happened, and Tom Port sent me an email. He said, well, what do you want us to do with your record? We did the shootout, and what do you want us to do with your record? And I said, well, you know, how did it do in the shootout? And he said, poorly. And then he sent me the shootout notes. So there's more details on this on my website, but needless to say that the record that did significantly better was actually the one that I had convinced myself wasn't as good, and the one that I had thought I liked better did significantly worse. So I realized, okay, I've got something I need to learn about this title, and I should just do a real shootout for it, or as near to that as I can manage. So I ordered a couple more copies. I talked to Tom, and I talked to the folks at Better Records, and I said, I'm going to do a shootout for Brilliant Corners. Can do you have any extra copies you can send me? And so by that time, they had a white hot stamper for sale on their website. And I figured they probably had, a few more from the shootout that either didn't do as well, or they hadn't put up for sale yet, whatever. So they sent me 3 copies. In the meantime, I bought a second copy of the record that didn't do that well in the shootout, that had the quote-unquote wrong stampers. So I had these 6 copies to work with, and I conducted the shootout. I made my notes. I'm not going to show you, I'm not going to give you the play-by-play that I did for the Revolver shootout that I did a while back, to try to streamline this video a little bit. But I'll show you my notes, and I'll talk about some of the things that I learned doing the shootout, and some of the things that I did differently. So for instance, with Revolver, I used the first 2 tracks on each side of the album. So every record, all the copies I had, I only played those 2 tracks really. Occasionally I would go into the 3rd track, but I didn't really make notes on that. I didn't use the third track or any track after that to evaluate the record. But jazz records, of course, are different. And in the case of this record, you've got 2 tracks on the first side and you've got 3 tracks on the second side. So it's not as many tracks. And so in this case, I used all 5 tracks on the album to conduct the shootout. I made notes for all 5 tracks on all 6 copies. And so I want to talk a little bit about some of the things I noticed, and then I'll show you my notes, and we'll wrap it up. So stay with me. So one thing I wanted to mention is that this record, I think part of the reason that I had difficulty with evaluating the copies I had previously was because it's kind of a difficult record to play. It's got some challenging passages in it, actually. And just as an aside, I just want to mention that, when audiophiles of demo equipment, like if you go to a store and you are going to buy a new amplifier, a new pair of speakers, they never will play you anything that's difficult to play. It'll always be like a jazz trio or a female vocalist, and like not a lot of not a lot of orchestration, not like difficult arrangements, just usually pretty sparse, so you can focus in on the individual parts. And I understand why they do it, but having a great stereo is really more about being able to play the records that are hard to play than the records that are easy to play. If you can play records that are hard to play, then when you play records that are easy to play, they're amazing. I mean, it's kind of like frustrating to me that audiophiles, anyway, don't get me started, they just don't challenge themselves enough, in my opinion. Anyway, in the case of Brilliant Corners, I wouldn't say it's among the most challenging jazz records to play, but it's got some difficult parts. In particular, the opening track, the title track, Brilliant Corners, you have this difficult passage right out of the gate when the horns come in. So that track, you can learn a lot about the record right from that first track. You can listen for the energy of the music, top end extension, low end extension, resolution, top end resolution, how much air and space there is, how much weight there is, how transparent the record is. So you get a lot of information just listening to Brilliant Corners. The second track, Baloo Bolivar Baluzar, I don't even know if I'm saying that right. It shows you how sweet the horns can sound, or conversely, how sweet they don't sound. So you really want the horns to sound sweet on that track, and if they don't sound sweet, then usually that's indicating that it's not as transparent, you don't have as good of top end extension, there's not as much air and space. In other words, they're not able to resolve well enough and to give you enough of the studio space in the background to make you really feel like you want to listen to those horns, because they're not, it's not the easiest, they're not the easiest horns to listen to, let's put it that way. I mean, they can sound wonderful, but they can also sound not so wonderful. On the second side, Panonica, the air and space on that really stands out. So Thelonius Monk is playing this instrument called the Celeste, and so you have these chimes. It's like a piano, but the sound is like the sound of chimes. Like, I think they're also called chime pianos. And if those chimes don't sort of ring and give you the sense of like ringing in a space in a room, then you definitely have problems there. The other thing about that song is because it strikes me as something of a love song. And if you don't feel relaxed while you're listening to it, particularly during Sonny Rollins' solo on the album, once you've moved along through that solo a bit, you should feel like you can really settle in and enjoy that track. So that's really important for that track. You should really fall in love with that track at least by halfway in. So I don't know what that says, but I guess, it's important, in audio, how are we responding to the music? On the second track of the second side, I Surrender Dear, so that's basically just a piano track. And so that's a great track for focusing in and asking yourself, how does the piano sound? Does it sound like a real piano? Does it have the size? Does it have the weight? Does it have the right tonality? Do the notes just ring and sound true? And does it have presence? Do you really get a sense of there being a piano there in the room in front of you? So that track strikes me as the crucial track for, if the piano isn't right on that track, then it shouldn't really be right on any of the other tracks. As I try to admit as often as I can, I'm not really all that knowledgeable about jazz, so I'm sure some of you who will watch this will think, this guy doesn't know a lick about jazz. And I honestly, I would never claim to know that. But I did a little research to try to brush up my knowledge of this particular album, and learned something that I hadn't known before. Maybe because I just never bothered to read the liner notes on the back of the jacket. But when you get to the last track on the album, Bemsha Swing, you have a different lineup. So now you've got Paul Chambers on bass instead of Pettiford. Yes, instead of Pettiford, you've got Paul Chambers. There's no more Ernie Henry on the alto sax. Instead, you have Clark Terry on the trumpet. And are we still with Max Roach? I think we still have Max Roach playing drums here and Sonny Rollins on tenor. So you got a different lineup on this last track. And there is something kind of different about this track when you listen to it. And one of the things that really stands out for me on this track is, first of all, the piano comes in and Monk's playing kind of quiet for the record. He's not really pounding on the keys. It's kind of a gentle intro as they go. And then suddenly you hear the bass drum at the back of the studio. And that bass drum can sound so big and so powerful, it just knocks your socks off when you hear it. And then suddenly the rest of the band comes in and the song just explodes out of the speakers. Or at least that's what it sounds like on the better copies. Absolutely explosive. So this song, Bemsha Swing, when you're evaluating your copy, it should be as explosive as you can imagine a jazz song playing. It's an incredibly just thrilling song to listen to. It surprised me. I played this album so many times, and in this shootout, I just, a couple of the copies just really nailed that track, and boy, does it sound wonderful. Really enjoy that song in particular. So we'll pause here for a moment, and then I'll show you the notes that I took on these records, and then we'll wrap things up. So here are my notes on the 6 copies. I had a copy that I called the A copy. Good energy, nice air and space. Transparent, horn has good presence. Solid, weighty solid, lively drums, excuse me. Very airy cymbals. So that's the first track, first side. Second side, nice top end extension. Could use just a bit more weight to it. That was actually a nitpick. You know, probably not a white hot stamper, but boy, that was one really good side of the record. Meanwhile, the number 1 copy, so that's one side one. So that came to me from Better Records. That was one of the records that did not win the Shootout. Big bass. Boy, that copy had a lot of bass. Could be more transparent, I thought, question mark. Weighty. Maybe a little more top end extension would have been nice. Horns maybe a little sweeter on that second track. I've been trying to develop some shorthand here, and now I don't even know what my shorthand means. VP top. I'll have to figure that out. Could use a bit more air and space. So that's the number 1 copy that Better Records sent me. And then the number 2 copy here. Good energy. Could use some more bass, I felt. Seemed a bit veiled to me. Lacking some presence. The drums not as big on that copy. The horns have good sweetness, maybe a bit thin. Maybe lacking a little weight, I found that copy. Now this B copy, that was the one I sent them that did quote-unquote poorly in the Shootout. Sounded aggressive to me. Had pretty good weight. I think that was one of the things that I really enjoyed about it initially, was it seemed to have just better bass than the other copy I had. Okay in terms of transparency, okay presence. Again, good bass, big weighty drums. I found the second track to be pretty musical, open. Could be more open. I think that's what I meant by that little swiggle. Could have more top end. So moving on to the second side here, we're back to the A copy. Second side, first track, open, spacious, nice top end extension, really transparent, really musical. Maybe a little more bass. That was kind of nitpicky. Piano has great presence. That third track, big and deep and explosive and powerful, and really well balanced from top to bottom. I really liked that side. For me, that was my favorite of all the side 2s. And then the number 1 copy came in pretty close to that. Super transparent, great space, great top end extension, energy, nice space around the horn, great presence and on the piano, very lively piano, transparent, great balance top to bottom, great energy on that third track. So that was the number 1 copy that Better Records loaned me. The number 2 copy they loaned me, good transparency, air and space, needs a little weight, maybe lacking a little energy, maybe a tad dry. Top end extension could be better. Piano feels a bit light. And number 3, track 3C, number 1 above, could be bigger. So that was the one I borrowed from Better Records. Might have been the one I sold them, actually. And then the B copy, so again, this is with the wrong stampers, but the better copy of the wrong stampers. Pretty transparent. I'm saying something about the bass there. I got to figure that out. Basically compressed, too compressed, but because it had good top end extension, that kind of helped out a bit. Aggressive, but not too bad. Mainly the horns there. Piano just seems like it's cut too loud. Needs more air and space. And the piano fared better on the last track, and overall, I thought that, it was good. It was a good side, not great but good. And then number 3 copy from Better Records. So that's the White Hot Stamper. It earned a nearly white hot grade on this side too, I should add. Again, I've got to figure out what I'm saying about the bass there. Great top end extension, open, airy, maybe a little more transparent, maybe a little bit more space around the horn. I was being nitpicky there. Piano has good bass extension, I think is what I was saying on the piano. The piano seemed really weighty. Maybe a little more, could be maybe a little more transparent, a little more present. And on that third track, big but could be bigger. Maybe needs a little more air and space. But really good bass on that, actually. And then on the C copy, that was the one that I sent them that did poorly in the shootout. Horns, again, a little too aggressive, compressed, but good impact, weight, needs space and air. Piano not as natural, not as musical. Track 3, C, number 1 above. And too small and closed in, I found. That one. Definitely the worst of the bunch. So doing the shootout, I realized the mistake that I made with this wrong Stamper copy. And it's a total rookie mistake. I just didn't play the record loud enough. Sometimes my wife's working, I just can't play it at the right volume, some of these records, and I have limited time, and I cut corners. I shouldn't do it, but I do. I cut corners. I play it as loud as I can get away with, and I should not be evaluating records that way. It's not the way to do it, because once the volume came up, you could hear that the mastering wasn't right, that they had a good tape. There wasn't a problem there, but it was too compressed. And with that compression, you just don't get the room. You don't get the size and the space and the even though it's a mono record, there's a sense of kind of the instruments in relation to one another, and in relation to the room, and in relation to the microphone. And if you don't get if the dynamics are off, then it's just not as fun to listen to. But nevertheless, that second copy that I bought with the wrong stampers, I think it's a pretty good copy of this record. I think a lot of people would be super happy with that. If that was the only copy I'd ever heard, I'd be pretty happy with it. Fortunately, unfortunately maybe, for me at this point, pretty good is just, it's not good enough. Not for this title. I mean, this is one of the greatest jazz records ever. I've been listening to it for 40 years almost, and I love it, and pretty good is not going to cut it. So thankfully I've got a good copy with the right stampers, with a heck of a good side 2 and a very, very good side 1. So I'm glad that was a good thing that came out of the shootout. But I'll tell you, the copy that I'm sending back, the White Hot Stamper that I'm sending back to Better Records, when that goes back up on the site for sale, there's some condition issues. There's a little bit of groove noise on one side for one of the tracks. It is really not that bad. I feel like they tend to kind of overstate, actually, their condition issues, just because they don't want people to get freaked out when they hear them. But anybody who gets that record is getting one heck of a demo disc jazz record of one of the greatest jazz records of all time. So big thumbs up for the White Hot Stamper. If you're considering it, I highly recommend it. Thank you for joining me and I'll see you next time.